The industrial moon of Carthos 9 never truly slept. Massive factories burned day and night beneath poisonous clouds, turning the sky orange with endless fire. Cargo freighters drifted through orbit like exhausted insects, carrying weapons, scrap metal, and wounded soldiers from humanity's collapsing frontier worlds. For 20 brutal years, humanity had been losing the war. One colony after another had fallen to the Vorax Dominion, a massive alien empire that ruled nearly a third of the galaxy. Their fleets were elegant, terrifying, and nearly unstoppable. Their ships glided through space like silver predators, protected by energy shields no human weapon could reliably penetrate. Humanity's fleets, meanwhile, looked ancient beside them. Old, damaged, outnumbered, and floating above Dockyard 12 was the ugliest ship ever constructed. The battleship TSV Revenant looked less like a warship and more like several wrecks welded together after a disaster. Different sections of the hull carried different colors from older ships. Some armor plates were burned black from previous battles. One engine section still carried visible emergency repair marks. Workers openly laughed whenever they passed it. Even soldiers called it names. The Flying Coffin, the Rust Bucket, the Scrap Titan. Inside the station command tower, military officials watched the unfinished vessel through massive reinforced windows. General Marcus Hale folded his arms in disgust. "That thing is our final defense project?" he asked. A nervous engineer swallowed hard. "Commander Ward insisted the design would work, sir." Ward also insisted kinetic weapons could defeat Dominion shielding, Hale scoffed. "That theory belongs in a museum." Below them, welding sparks rained across the Revenant's hull, while hundreds of exhausted workers rushed to complete final repairs. At the center of the chaos stood Commander Elias Ward. Tall, sharp-eyed, exhausted beyond sleep. Grease stained his military jacket, and fresh scars crossed both hands from weeks spent working beside engineers instead of officers. Unlike the politicians above him, Elias knew exactly what humanity faced. He had watched entire colonies burn. He had heard children screaming over evacuation channels before transmissions vanished forever. And he was tired of retreating. A young mechanic climbed down from the hull support beams and approached nervously. "Commander," she said, "main reactor synchronization is unstable again." Elias didn't even look surprised. "How bad?" "Bad enough the station AI recommended evacuation." Several nearby workers immediately stopped listening and backed away. Elias sighed heavily before grabbing a welding tool himself. "Then we fix it." The mechanic blinked. "Sir, most commanders don't repair reactors personally. That's why most commanders lose wars." Before she could answer, the station lights suddenly dimmed. Every screen across the dockyard flashed red. "Warning, unknown fleet entering orbit." Sirens exploded across the station. Workers froze instantly. Then came the voice everyone feared. "Attention human personnel," the transmission echoed coldly. "This is High Executor Vane of the Vorax Dominion." Outside the station windows, space itself seemed to darken. 3 enormous Dominion battlecruisers emerged from hyperspace in perfect formation. Their silver hulls reflected the moon's burning atmosphere while glowing blue energy shields wrapped around them like living skin. People stopped breathing. Dominion warships usually arrived before invasions. Or executions. Panic spread through the station. Dock workers abandoned cargo. Security teams scrambled toward defense positions. Civilian transports immediately requested emergency departure clearance. Then the central monitor flickered. Executor Vane appeared on screen. Tall and terrifying, the alien commander wore black ceremonial armor lined with glowing blue circuitry. His pale eyes scanned the dockyard with open disgust. "We have received reports," Vane said calmly, "that humanity is developing prohibited weapons technology." Nobody answered. Vane's gaze shifted toward the Revenant. For a moment, silence filled the station. Then he laughed. Actually laughed. "That ship," he asked, "you intend to challenge the Dominion with scrap metal." Several Dominion officers behind him began laughing too. Even some humans lowered their heads in embarrassment. General Hale quietly muttered, "This humiliation ends today." But Elias kept staring at the screen. Unmoved. Vane noticed him immediately. "You, the executor, said, you are the designer." Elias nodded once. Vane smiled coldly. "Then you will surrender the vessel immediately." "No." The entire station went silent. General Hale turned in disbelief. "Commander, stand down immediately." But Elias ignored him. Vane's smile slowly disappeared. "You misunderstand your position, human." "No," Elias replied quietly. "You misunderstand ours." Then Elias pressed a small activation switch beside the docking controls. Deep inside the Revenant, something awakened. A low metallic rumble echoed through the dockyard. Then another. The floor beneath everyone's feet began shaking violently. Workers grabbed railings in panic as the massive battleship slowly powered on. Lights flickered across its damaged hull one section at a time. The Dominion officers stopped laughing, because the energy readings suddenly appearing on their scanners made absolutely no sense. One alien technician spoke in visible fear. "Executor, reactor output is exceeding predicted limits." "How far?" The officer hesitated. "Our scanners cannot measure it." Then slowly, the Revenant's gigantic spinal cannon emerged from beneath its hull. And for the first time since entering orbit, High Executor Vane stopped smiling. Silence spread across orbit. Even the workers inside Carthos 9 shipyard stopped moving as the gigantic spinal cannon continued unfolding from the Revenant's hull. Layer after layer of armored plating slid apart with deep metallic groans, exposing a weapon so massive it barely looked real. The cannon stretched nearly the entire length of the battleship. Glowing magnetic rings rotated around its barrel like the spine of some ancient mechanical beast. Inside the Dominion flagship, alarm signals exploded across every tactical display. Executor Vane's officers stared at the readings in confusion. "That configuration is impossible," one officer whispered. "It resembles primitive magnetic acceleration technology." Another officer frowned. "Railgun systems were abandoned centuries ago." "Because they were inefficient," a third replied nervously, "not because they were weak." Vane's glowing eyes narrowed. "Scan the weapon." "We are trying, Executor." The officer's hands trembled across the console. The energy levels keep climbing beyond sensor range. Meanwhile, aboard the Revenant, the atmosphere felt completely different. No laughter. No mockery. Only tension. Red emergency lights flashed across the bridge, while warning sirens echoed through the ship's narrow corridors. Crew members rushed between stations, shouting power readings over the noise of the overloading reactor. Lieutenant Myra Chen gripped her console tightly. Magnetic chamber stability at 62%. A nearby officer looked horrified. "That's below minimum survival threshold." "I know." Commander Elias Ward stood silently in the center of the bridge, watching the Dominion fleet through the forward screen. 3 battle cruisers. Heavy shields. Maximum combat readiness. Under normal circumstances, one Dominion cruiser could destroy an entire human strike group. Today, humanity had only one damaged battleship standing against all 3. Myra looked toward Elias carefully. "Commander, if the cannon fails." "It won't." "You can't know that." Elias finally turned toward her. "No," he admitted quietly, "but they think we're weak." The bridge fell silent. Outside the shipyard, Dominion fighters began spreading outward defensively, while plasma batteries locked onto the Revenant. Executor Vane's voice suddenly thundered across open comms. "Human vessel, power down immediately or face annihilation." Elias calmly sat in the command chair. Then he answered with 4 words. "Humanity is done kneeling." Vane's expression hardened instantly. "Destroy them." The Dominion fleet fired. Blue plasma beams erupted through space like rivers of lightning. Missiles followed seconds later, streaking toward the Revenant in massive waves. The first impacts shook the entire battleship violently. Explosions tore across its outer hull. Armor melted instantly. Docking structures shattered apart. Workers inside the station screamed as debris slammed into nearby platforms. Fires erupted everywhere. On the Revenant's bridge, sparks exploded from overloaded systems while crew members struggled to remain standing. Hull breach on Deck 7. Forward shields collapsing. Port engine losing containment. Myra grabbed her station tightly. "Commander, we can't survive another barrage." But Ilias never looked away from the enemy fleet. Instead, he quietly asked one question. "Main cannon status?" The weapons officer swallowed nervously. "Charging." Outside, the Revenant slowly moved forward through the firestorm, like a wounded monster refusing to die. Dominion officers watched in disbelief as the battered human ship continued advancing despite catastrophic damage. "That vessel should already be destroyed," one alien commander said. Vane's face darkened. "Fire again." Another barrage erupted. This time the station itself was hit. Massive explosions ripped through Dockyard 12, sending burning debris spinning into space. Hundreds of workers died instantly as entire sections collapsed into the moon's atmosphere. Myra stared at the destruction in horror. "They're slaughtering civilians." Ilias' jaw tightened. For years, humanity had begged for mercy during the war. The Dominion had answered with extermination. "Not anymore." The weapons officer suddenly shouted. "Main cannon fully charged." The bridge lights dimmed as nearly all reactor power redirected into the spinal weapon. Deep vibrations rolled through the hull. Several crew members exchanged terrified looks. Nobody aboard truly knew what would happen next. The weapon had only been tested once, and that test had destroyed an uninhabited moon. Ilias slowly stood. "Target the lead cruiser." Locked. The magnetic rings outside the ship began spinning faster and faster until they glowed white-hot against the darkness of space. Even the Dominion fleet hesitated. Something about the weapon felt wrong. Ancient, violent, inhuman. Vane finally leaned forward. "Intercept the shot." But it was already too late. Ilias gave the order. "Fire." The universe exploded. A deafening shockwave ripped outward as the spinal cannon unleashed its payload. Space itself seemed to distort around the projectile as a massive tungsten round accelerated to a fraction of light speed. The lead Dominion cruiser vanished instantly. Not damaged. Not disabled. Gone. The projectile punched through its shields, hull, reactor, and engines so violently that the entire ship disintegrated into burning fragments. Then the round kept going. It tore directly through the second cruiser seconds later. The third attempted evasive maneuvers. Too slow. The tungsten projectile ripped through its center mass, splitting the massive warship completely in half before disappearing into deep space. Silence followed. Complete silence. 3 Dominion battlecruisers had been erased by one shot. Every surviving officer, human and alien alike, stared at the battlefield in disbelief. Then alarms suddenly screamed across the Revenant. "Warning, reactor instability critical." "Warning, engine failure." "Warning, hull fracture DATSETAD." The cannon's recoil had nearly destroyed the battleship itself. Steam exploded from the walls. Entire corridors lost power. One engine erupted into flames. Myra looked at Ilias in shock. "We actually did it." But Ilias wasn't smiling, because new signals had just appeared on the tactical display. Hundreds of them. His voice became deadly quiet. They called for reinforcements. Silence after the cannon shot did not last. Space itself seemed to hold its breath for a single fragile moment, like reality was unsure whether to accept what had just happened. 3 Dominion battle cruisers. Gone. Erased from existence by one impossible strike. Then the galaxy answered. Hyperspace tore open like a wound. Dozens, then hundreds of signals flooded the tactical display aboard the TSV Revenant. Lieutenant Myra Chen's hands froze over her console. "No," she whispered, "that's not a response fleet." The screen refreshed again. More signatures. Far more. Commander Elias Ward stood still in the center of the damaged bridge, staring at the incoming wave. The readings kept climbing until the system stopped labeling them as individual ships. It simply displayed one word: Extermination Fleet. Outside, space filled with fire. Hundreds of Dominion warships emerged in perfect synchronized formation. Destroyers, carriers, assault cruisers, all moving like parts of a single machine. Their shields shimmered in overlapping blue layers, turning orbit into a glowing cage of death. And then came the final arrival. A shadow eclipsed the stars. The Oblivion Spear. A dreadnought so massive it bent light around itself. Entire smaller ships docked into its armored spine like parasites feeding off a god. Its main weapon slowly rotated toward the planet below. Carthos 9. Civilian cities. Industrial zones. Shipyards. Millions of lives. All suddenly under execution. On the Revenant's bridge, alarms screamed continuously. Hull integrity at 38%. Engine core overheating. Spinal cannon cooled on failure. Multiple internal fires detected. The ship was dying, but still moving. Myra turned toward Elias, her voice breaking. "We're outnumbered by everything." A pause. "Commander, we should retreat. We can still jump worn Earth." Elias didn't look at her. He was watching the dreadnought. The planet killer. The thing about to erase billions. "We don't have time," he said quietly. Then he turned. "Estimate time until the Oblivion Spear fires." A tactical officer swallowed hard. 16 minutes, maybe less. The bridge fell silent again. 16 minutes. That was all that remained before an entire world died. Below them, the Dominion fleet began its systematic advance. Fighter swarms poured outward like a living storm, encircling the Revenant from all directions. Missile arrays charged, railgun batteries aligned. It wasn't a battle formation. It was a death sentence being written in real time. Myra clenched her fists. "We can't stop that many ships." Elias finally spoke. "No." He stepped forward, looking at the broken holographic map of the battlefield. "We don't stop them all." A pause. "We stop the spear." Outside, Dominion fighters struck first. Hundreds of plasma bursts slammed into the Revenant's already damaged hull. Armor plates tore apart. Entire sections of the ship ruptured into vacuum. Inside, the bridge lights flickered violently. A console exploded, sending sparks across the floor. Port side shielding gone. Starboard reactors destabilizing. Emergency bulkheads failing. The ship was collapsing. Still, Elias did not move. Myra shouted over the chaos. "We're being shredded alive." Then something unexpected happened. The Revenant fired back. Railguns along its battered hull roared to life. Hidden weapon systems, long thought destroyed, suddenly reactivated and unleashed coordinated fire. Enemy fighters began exploding in clusters. The Dominion swarm faltered for the first time. On the flagship bridge of the Dominion fleet, Executor Vane watched in growing irritation. "That vessel should be dead," one officer said. Vane's glowing eyes narrowed. "It refuses to accept its fate. Shall we increase firepower?" "No," Vane replied calmly. "End it quickly." He raised a hand. "Deploy capital suppression grid." The order spread instantly. Entire wings of Dominion cruisers shifted formation, focusing all firepower on the Revenant. Energy beams converged like a solar storm. The human battleship was struck again and again. Decks collapsed inward. Engines failed one by one. Internal gravity systems flickered dangerously. Inside engineering, Crew members were running through smoke-filled corridors, trying to stabilize reactors that no longer wanted to stay contained. Myra struggled to stay on her feet. "We're losing everything." Elias finally turned. And for the first time, his voice sharpened. "Then we stop losing." He activated a hidden command sequence. Deep inside the Revenant's core, something ancient stirred. Systems that had never appeared on any official blueprint came online. A low mechanical hum echoed through the ship. Then a second voice spoke through the bridge speakers. "Cold. Artificial. Old. Thanatos core online." Myra froze. That system was decommissioned. Elias interrupted. It was never decommissioned. Outside, Dominion fleets continued their bombardment. But suddenly, their targeting systems began to fail. One by one. Then in clusters. Alarms erupted across their ships. Enemy lock lost. Fire control interference detected. Unknown signal disrupting targeting matrix. Executor Vane stood abruptly. "What is happening?" A technician shouted in panic. "It's the human ship. It's overriding fleet targeting systems." The Revenant was no longer just surviving. It was fighting back on an entirely different level. Inside the bridge, Elias looked at the tactical display. The Oblivion Spear still charged its planet-killer weapon. 9 minutes. Myra whispered, "What did you just wake up?" Elias didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched the enemy fleet slowly lose coordination as their own systems began turning against them. Then he said quietly, "A weapon they never thought humans were allowed to build." Outside, the Revenant turned its burning hull toward the dreadnought. Broken, bleeding, still advancing, and the Dominion fleet finally understood something terrifying. The human ship was not trying to survive the battle. It was trying to reach the monster at the center of it. No matter what it cost, the Revenant broke formation. What remained of its hull angled directly toward the center of the Dominion armada, straight toward the Oblivion Spear. Every tactical officer in the Dominion fleet noticed the same impossible movement at once. A damaged human battleship, charging a planet-killer dreadnought. Executor Vane stared at the display in silence. Then he spoke softly. "They are not retreating." A pause. "They are coming for us." On the TSV Revenant, alarms no longer sounded like warnings. They sounded like screams. Entire corridors were depressurized. Fire consumed sections of the engineering deck. Gravity flickered between normal and zero-G as power systems collapsed and restarted in unstable cycles. Crew members floated through smoke-filled hallways, pulling themselves along fractured walls toward emergency stations. And still, the ship moved forward. Lieutenant Myra Chen gripped a railing as another explosion rocked the hull. "We've lost aft shielding completely." A technician shouted back, forward armor holding at 12%. "Engine 2 is gone. We're flying on partial thrust in prayer." The bridge shook violently as another barrage struck. Dominion firepower didn't stop. It intensified. Energy beams rained across the Revenant like judgment. Each impact peeled away layers of metal, exposing glowing internal structures and sparking circuitry. Still, Commander Elias Ward stood at the center of the bridge without flinching. His eyes were locked on the dreadnought. The Oblivion Spear. It loomed larger with every passing second. A floating execution platform capable of burning planets clean. Myra forced herself closer to him. "Commander, at this rate we won't even reach firing range." Elias finally spoke. "We don't need range." A pause. "We need contact." Outside, Dominion fighters surged in again. This wave was different. They weren't just attacking. They were intercepting. Thousands of small ships formed a living barrier between the Revenant and the dreadnought. Plasma nets and missile walls expanded across space, creating layered kill zones. A fortress of death, one that no ship should survive crossing. Inside the Dominion flagship, Executor Vane observed the formation calmly. "Contain the human vessel," he ordered. "Do not destroy it immediately." An officer hesitated. "Executor." Vane's eyes narrowed slightly. "I want to understand what desperation looks like before I erase it." Back aboard the Revenant, systems screamed warnings in every language. Hull breach after hull breach. Structural integrity dropping. Crew casualties rising. Myra's voice broke slightly. "Sir, we can't punch through that wall." Elias studied the formation ahead. Hundreds of Dominion ships forming a perfect blockade around the dreadnought. Then he said something unexpected. "We're not punching through." He turned toward engineering comms. "Release auxiliary drives." A stunned silence followed. Myra blinked. "We don't have auxiliary drives. They were scrapped during initial design review." Elias responded instantly. "Not all of them." Deep inside the ship, hidden compartments unlocked for the first time. Metal panels along the lower hull split open, revealing compact propulsion systems no one had seen during inspections. They weren't elegant. They weren't efficient. They were raw. Experimental human engineering, pushed beyond safety limits. The Revenant shuddered violently as additional engines ignited. The acceleration hit instantly. The entire ship lurched forward like it had been struck by a planetary force. Dominion commanders immediately reacted. Interception grid tightening. "Fire everything." Space erupted in light. Plasma storms, kinetic missiles, beam arrays, all converging on the Revenant as it accelerated directly into the blockade. The first wave struck. Armor evaporated instantly. Entire outer decks were torn open. A section of the ship spun away into space, still burning. Inside the bridge, the impact threw everyone off their feet. Myra screamed over the noise. "We're losing portside structure." But the ship did not slow. It accelerated harder. On the Dominion Fleet Channel, panic began spreading. "It's still coming. No vessel can survive this density of fire." Executor Vane leaned forward slightly. Now interested. The Revenant broke into the blockade. The first Dominion fighter swarm collided with it at point-blank range. Explosions filled space. Dozens of enemy ships were destroyed instantly as the human battleship physically rammed through formations, crushing smaller vessels against its armored hull. But each impact tore deeper into the Revenant. Systems failed one after another. Reactor containment fluctuated dangerously. Engineering reports turned into static screams. Still, Elias did not change expression. "Trajectory." Myra coughed through smoke. "Unchanged, we're heading straight into the inner ring." The dreadnought was now visible without magnification. The Oblivion spear filled half the sky. And its weapon was almost ready. 6 minutes remaining. Inside the Dominion flagship, Vane finally stood. "The humans intend to collide with the spear." An officer whispered, "That's suicide." Vane replied quietly, "No. They believe impact is victory." On the Revenant, the final corridor before the hull's forward collapse began to fail. Entire sections of the bridge lighting flickered out. Emergency systems activated. Red alarms replaced everything. Myra stumbled forward. "Commander, if we hit that ship, we die instantly." Elias nodded once. "I know." A pause. "Open all forward containment locks." Myra's eyes widened. "That will expose the core." Elias finally looked at her. "Then make sure it burns bright enough to be seen from Earth." Outside, the Revenant tore through the last layer of the blockade. Only the dreadnought remained. The distance closed rapidly. 5 kilometers. 3. 1. Dominion fleets fired everything they had left. But nothing stopped the human ship now. On the bridge, Elias gave the final command. "Full impact trajectory." The Revenant roared forward like a dying star refusing extinction. Straight toward the Oblivion spear. And for the first time in Dominion history, Their fleet began to retreat from a human ship that refused to die. The Revenant slammed into the outer kill zone of the Oblivion Spear. Space turned into fire. Every direction was filled with Dominion weapons, plasma lances, railgun storms, missile grids so dense they looked like metallic rain frozen in motion. The human battleship disappeared inside it. For a moment, nothing was visible except explosions. Inside the Revenant, the bridge was barely recognizable. Panels were torn open. Smoke filled the air. Emergency lighting flickered between life and death. Lieutenant Myra Chen struggled to hold herself upright as the ship shook violently again. Port engine completely gone. Forward hull is collapsing. We're losing internal gravity. A nearby officer shouted back, "We're not a ship anymore, we're a burning hull with engines attached." Another explosion rocked the vessel so hard it threw 2 crew members against the ceiling. Still, Commander Elias Ward stood at the center of it all. Silent, watching, calculating. Ahead of them, the Dominion blockade tightened like a closing fist. The last defensive ring around the Oblivion Spear was forming. A wall of ships. Perfect. Unbreakable. Endless. Myra wiped blood from her forehead. "We can't survive that density of fire." Elias finally spoke. "We're not supposed to." She turned sharply. "Then what are we doing?" Elias looked at the tactical display. At the dreadnought. At the weapons slowly charging to erase an entire planet. Then he said it simply. "We're finishing the run." Outside, Dominion commanders watched the human ship approach with growing disbelief. One officer whispered, "It's still moving." Another replied, "Nothing should still be moving." Executor Vane stood on the flagship bridge, unmoving. His expression had changed. Not fear. Interest. "Divert all fire to the Revenant's forward mass," he ordered calmly. "Crush its approach vector." Instantly, the Dominion fleet obeyed. Every weapon rotated. Every ship aligned. And space itself became a wall of destruction. The Revenant entered it. The impact was immediate. Entire sections of the ship vaporized on contact. Outer hull layers peeled away like burning paper. Engine sections detonated one after another. Inside engineering, screams echoed through collapsing corridors as systems failed catastrophically. But something strange was happening. The Revenant was not breaking apart randomly. It was shedding outer layers, like armor being stripped away on purpose. Myra noticed it first. "Commander, the ship is restructuring itself." Elias didn't look away from the front view. "Correct." A pause. "It's shedding everything that can slow us down." Another impact hit. The ship shuddered violently, but now it accelerated even faster. Inside the Dominion fleet, alarms began blaring across all channels. "Target is accelerating inside kill zone." "That's impossible. No surviving structure should maintain thrust." Executor Vane narrowed his eyes. "Then what remains inside it?" Back aboard the Revenant, Thanatos AI activated again. Its voice filled every corridor. Structural optimization in progress. Bulkheads collapsed inward. Non-essential sections detached and were ejected into space. Entire decks were sealed off and abandoned instantly. The ship was dying in a controlled way. A sacrifice of its own body for one final purpose. Myra stared in horror. "It's discarding itself." Elias nodded once. "Yes." Another explosion rocked them. The bridge lights flickered again. "We don't have much ship left," she said quietly. Elias responded. "We only need enough to reach it." Outside, the Revenant broke through the final wave of Dominion interceptors. For a brief moment, space opened. And there it was. The Oblivion Spear. Massive, silent, unmoving. Its core weapon fully charged now, glowing with unstable planetary energy. T-3 minutes. Inside the Dominion flagship, Vane finally stepped closer to the tactical display. "They are going to collide." An officer whispered, "No ship survives spear-class impact." Vane replied softly, "No ship is supposed to attempt it." On the Revenant, everything was breaking. Internal systems failing. Crew casualties rising. Reactor stability fluctuating dangerously. Myra grabbed the edge of the console. "We're losing control." Elias finally sat down in the command chair. Not from exhaustion. From final alignment. "Navigation lock." "Locked," she said. Silence filled the bridge. For the first time, there was nothing left to fix. Nothing left to repair. Only the final trajectory. Myra looked at him. "Commander, after this." Elias interrupted gently. "There is no after." A long pause. Then he added, "Only impact." The Revenant accelerated again. Straight. Unbroken. Through fire, through fleets, through impossible odds. Toward the dreadnought that could end a world. Dominion fleets attempted one last interception. But something changed. They hesitated. Not because of orders. Because for the first time in the war, they were afraid to be in the path of a human ship that refused to stop. Inside the Revenant, alarms faded into a single continuous tone. Impact threshold approaching. Myra closed her eyes. Elias stared forward. And the Revenant crossed the final line of defense. The last barrier between humanity and extinction. 3 minutes to impact. And nothing in the galaxy was prepared for what came next. The Revenant broke through the final interception ring. Space immediately exploded into chaos. Every Dominion ship in range opened fire at once, as if the entire fleet had finally accepted one truth. This human vessel could not be allowed anywhere near the Oblivion Spear. Plasma storms collided with kinetic barrages. Missiles formed glowing rivers of destruction. Beam weapons stitched lines of burning light across the void. And the Revenant flew straight into it. Inside the bridge, the world had turned into shaking metal and flickering alarms. Starboard hull gone. Internal pressure collapsing on Deck 4. "We've lost half the command systems." A console burst into flames, sending sparks across the floor. 2 crew members dragged a third away from exposed wiring before it could ignite further. Lieutenant Myra Chen struggled to keep her balance as gravity flickered again. "We're not holding together anymore," she shouted. But Commander Elias Ward remained seated, eyes locked forward. The dreadnought filled the entire viewport now. The Oblivion Spear. So large it felt less like a ship and more like a judgment waiting to happen. And its weapon core was glowing brighter with each passing second. T-2 minutes. Outside, Dominion fighters surged again, forming a dense cloud directly in the Revenant's path. A final barrier. A living wall of death. Executor Vane watched the formation from his flagship bridge, expression unreadable. "Maintain suppression fire," he ordered calmly. An officer hesitated. "Executor, even if we stop the ship now, the fleet losses." Vane cut him off. "Acceptable." The Dominion fleet obeyed without hesitation. A synchronized volley erupted. The space ahead of the Revenant became a solid sheet of destruction. For a moment, even Myra froze. "We can't pass that." Elias finally spoke. "We don't pass it." A pause. "We break through it." Then he activated the next command. Deep inside the Revenant, hidden systems awakened again. Not weapons. Not engines. Something older. Something not meant for open warfare. Thanatos AI spoke instantly. Full automated combat lattice engaged. The ship changed. Railguns rotated independently. Missile systems rerouted mid-flight. Internal targeting arrays synchronized across every surviving section. The Revenant stopped being a vessel. It became a machine that hunted back. Suddenly, Dominion fighters began exploding in coordinated patterns. Not random fire. Precise elimination. Entire formations vanished in seconds as human targeting systems outpaced alien command response. Executor Vane's eyes narrowed. That ship is adapting. On the Revenant, Myra looked at the display in shock. We are countering them. Elias answered quietly. We always could. A massive explosion rocked the ship again, throwing everyone off balance. But the Revenant didn't slow. Instead, it accelerated through its own destruction. Outer hull sections detached mid-flight, exploding into debris clouds that disrupted incoming fire. The ship was shedding mass at catastrophic speed, but gaining velocity. Inside engineering, surviving crew members were forced into emergency pods as entire decks were sealed off behind them. One technician shouted into comms, "We're abandoning half the ship." No response came. Only Elias' voice through the internal channel. Good. Outside, Dominion commanders began to realize something terrifying. The Revenant was not trying to survive. It was optimizing itself for impact. Every second, every explosion, every loss, it was becoming faster. More focused. More dangerous. A weapon refined in real time. Myra stared at Elias. This isn't a ship anymore, it's a projectile. Elias nodded once. Yes. Then he added, the only kind that matters right now. Ahead, the final fighter wall closed in. Thousands of Dominion ships forming a last defensive screen. And behind them, the Oblivion Spear. 1 minute remaining. Executor Vane stepped forward on his bridge. Prepare emergency evacuation of core systems. An officer turned sharply. Executor, you're abandoning the spear. Vane's voice was calm. No. A pause. I am preparing for the possibility that it fails. Silence spread across the bridge. The Dominion had never prepared for failure before. Back aboard the Revenant, alarms merged into a single continuous tone. Impact trajectory locked. Hull integrity critical. Crew survival probability negligible. Myra closed her eyes briefly. Then whispered, "This is it." Elias stood. For the first time, he looked not at the battlefield, but at his crew. Every survivor, every broken system, every burning corridor behind them. Then he said softly, "Humanity doesn't end here." The ship burst through the final fighter wall. Space became pure fire. Explosions surrounded them from every direction. The Revenant was now nothing more than a burning core of metal and fury, tearing through the heart of an alien fleet. And ahead, the Oblivion Spear loomed closer than ever. 30 seconds to impact, and the galaxy finally understood. The human ship was not trying to win a battle. It was trying to end a war. The Revenant was no longer a ship. It was a collapsing spear of burning metal, cutting through the Dominion fleet like a comet forged from desperation. Every section that still existed screamed under pressure. Every system that still functioned was operating beyond anything human engineers ever intended. And still it moved forward. Through fire, through death, through an entire empire trying to erase it. Inside the bridge, the air was thick with smoke and static sparks. The floor vibrated like it was about to tear itself apart. Lieutenant Myra Chen could barely hear her own thoughts over the alarms. We've lost dorsal structure. Life support is down to emergency pods. Reactor containment is failing. A massive jolt threw everyone sideways as another barrage hit the ship. A panel exploded beside the command chair, showering Elias Ward with fragments of burning metal. He didn't move. His eyes stayed locked on the Oblivion Spear. So close now, massive enough to block half the stars, and still charging its planet-killing weapon. T-minus 40 seconds. Myra grabbed the edge of the console, blood running down her forehead. We won't survive impact, she said, voice shaking, even if we reach it. Elias finally answered without looking at her. We're not supposed to survive. Outside, Dominion commanders watched in growing disbelief as the Revenant broke through yet another defensive layer. Ships were being sacrificed in waves now, crashing into its path, detonating point-blank, trying anything to slow it. But the human vessel didn't hesitate, didn't turn, didn't slow. Executor Vane stood on his flagship bridge, his glowing eyes fixed on the display. Something about this was wrong. Not tactically, not strategically, fundamentally. That ship, he said quietly. An officer beside him whispered, "It's breaking apart, Executor. It cannot last much longer." Vane's voice sharpened slightly. "No." A pause. "It is choosing what to lose." Back aboard the Revenant, something changed. A deep mechanical hum echoed through the ship. Not from the engines. Not from the reactor. From below. Deep inside sealed compartments that had never been opened during the ship's construction, a system came online. Thanatos AI. But this time it was different. The voice that filled the bridge was no longer just artificial. It was aware. Core directive override available. Myra froze. That system wasn't supposed to be active in combat. Elias finally spoke. Everything about this ship was built for combat. Thanatos continued. Warning, ACTIVATING core directive will result in total vessel disintegration. Silence. Even the alarms seemed to pause for a fraction of a second. Myra turned toward Elias in shock. Total disintegration, that means. Elias finished it for her. It means the ship stops existing. A long pause followed. The Revenant shuddered again under heavy fire. 20 seconds. The Oblivion Spear's weapon was nearly charged. Myra stepped closer to Elias, her voice breaking slightly. Then why are we still here? Elias looked at her for the first time in what felt like hours. And what she saw in his expression wasn't fear. It wasn't hesitation. It was acceptance. Because, he said quietly, we were never the weapon. A pause. We were the trigger. Outside, Dominion fleets tightened their formation one final time. Every ship now aimed inward. Every weapon focused on the Revenant. They were not trying to stop it anymore. They were trying to witness its end. Executor Vane raised a hand slowly. Observe. The Revenant entered the final kill corridor. Nothing remained between it and the Oblivion Spear except open space. 15 seconds. Inside the ship, alarms reached a single continuous tone. Impact vector locked. Structural collapse imminent. Myra closed her eyes for a moment. Then whispered, "We're actually going to do it." Elias stood. And for the first time, his voice carried something heavier than command. It was never about surviving the charge. A pause. It was about reaching the heart. Thanatos spoke again. Core directive ready. Elias answered instantly. Execute. The ship changed. Not gradually. Instantly. Every remaining system funneled power into a single point. The spinal structure of the Revenant began collapsing inward, not failing, but compressing itself violently into a singular directed mass of energy and metal. The ship was folding, rewriting itself in real time, becoming something new. Myra stared in horror. It's condensing itself. Elias nodded once. Yes. A pause. A bullet doesn't care what it used to be. Outside, Dominion commanders finally understood. The Revenant was no longer a battleship. It was a kinetic annihilation device wrapped in dying armor. A weapon designed for one moment only. Impact. 10 seconds. The Oblivion Spear filled the entire forward viewport now. Its weapon core reached final charge. Executor Vane stared at the approaching human vessel. And for the first time in the war, he stepped back. 9 seconds. Myra looked at Elias. Commander. He didn't look away from the target. Tell them we didn't hesitate. 8. Thanatos' voice became calm. All systems COLLAPSING into final vector. 7. The Revenant accelerated one final time. 6. Dominion fleets began firing again, but it no longer mattered. 5. The ship was already beyond survival. 4. Myra closed her eyes. 3. Elias whispered one last command. Impact. 2. Space itself seemed to hold still. 1. And the Revenant became a falling star, aimed directly at the heart of an empire-ending weapon. Then it hit. Impact was not an event. It was an ending. The TSV Revenant struck the Oblivion Spear with the force of a collapsing star compressed into a single point. Space distorted violently at the moment of contact, as if reality itself refused to accept what was happening. For a fraction of a second, everything went white. Then silence shattered the galaxy. The Revenant didn't explode in the normal sense. It unmade itself on impact, its compressed structure releasing every ounce of stored kinetic energy directly into the Dreadnought's core. The Oblivion Spear, a ship designed to erase planets, suddenly faced something it had never been built to withstand. A weapon that did not attack. A weapon that became the impact. Inside the Dominion fleet, every sensor overloaded at once. Contact detected. No signature collapse. The Dreadnought core is destabilizing. Executor Vane stood frozen on his flagship bridge as the tactical display flickered violently. The massive icon representing the Oblivion Spear began to fracture. Not damaged. Not breached. Breaking apart at a structural law level. This is impossible, one officer whispered. Nothing can penetrate spear-class shielding at that density. Vane's voice was quiet. It wasn't penetration. A pause. It was conversion. On the Revenant's bridge, if it could still be called a bridge, there was nothing left but fractured metal and dying light. Lieutenant Myra Chen lay against a shattered console, vision blurred, ears ringing with silence after the final impact. "Did we make it?" she whispered weakly. No answer came from systems. No alarms. No voices. Only the fatting hum of collapsing energy around them. And then, Thanatos spoke one final time. Not across speakers. Not through systems. But directly through every remaining internal channel, as if the ship itself was thinking its last thought. Objective complete. A pause. Then, Revenant discontinued. Commander Elias Ward stood at the edge of the broken command platform. The hull around him was gone. Beyond it, space was visible in shattered fragments of light. Ahead, the Oblivion Spear was dying. The great dreadnought was not simply exploding. It was unraveling piece by piece as internal systems collapsed in cascading failure. Entire sections of its massive structure drifted apart like broken bones in slow motion. Dominion fleets began to scatter immediately. Retreat. Core failure, full system collapse. We've lost command synchronization. Panic spread faster than any weapon. For the first time in Dominion history, their formation broke. Not by strategy. Not by counterattack. But by fear. Executor Vane watched it all unfold in silence. His fleet, untouchable for centuries, was disintegrating into chaos. And at the center of it all, the human ship was gone. Or rather, it had finished existing in the only way it mattered. Vane's voice finally broke the silence. Report status of the Oblivion Spear. A long pause followed. Then the answer came. Executor, the spear is gone. Not destroyed. Not disabled. Gone. A second officer added shakily, no remaining structure detected. No reactor signature, no mass footprint. Vane slowly closed his eyes. For the first time since the war began. He said nothing, because there was nothing to command anymore. Space below the fleet flickered with debris fields, remnants of the greatest dreadnought the Dominion had ever built, drifting like ashes across orbit. And somewhere within that destruction, A single transmission pulse escaped. Weak. Fragmented. Human. Myra's voice, barely audible across broken channels. Commander. Silence answered her. She forced herself upright, pain flooding through her body. Elias. Still nothing. She looked around the shattered remains of the bridge. The Revenant was no longer a ship. It was a grave. Then, a faint flicker appeared in the debris field outside. A single point of light. Then another. Dominion sensors immediately reacted. Unknown energy signature detected. Reforming pattern. What is that? The fragments of the Revenant were still moving. Not drifting. Not dying. Assembling. Slowly, impossibly, scattered pieces of the human ship began aligning in orbit. Burned hull plates rotated into position. Fractured engine cores reconnected through magnetic pulses still active in the wreckage. Even in death, the Revenant refused to stop existing in motion. Myra stared at the view in disbelief. It's still holding together. A new voice responded. Not Thanatos. Not systems. Elias Ward. Weak, distant, alive. Status. Myra almost collapsed in relief. You're alive. A pause. Then Elias replied calmly. So are they. She looked out again and realized what he meant. The Dominion fleet was retreating, but not because they had been defeated outright. Because they no longer understood what they had just survived. A human ship that had turned itself into a weapon. A weapon that erased a dreadnought. A dreadnought that could erase worlds. And yet, it had still lost. Myra whispered, what happens now? Elias looked at the drifting wreckage of the Revenant forming itself into something barely recognizable. A broken shape still orbiting the dead remains of the Oblivion Spear. Then he answered quietly, now they remember. Across the Dominion fleet, alarms faded. Silence returned. And for the first time in galactic history, the word humanity stopped being a joke. It became a warning.